Welcome everyone to House of Sweden. What a pleasure to see you again. We are having this fantastic, exciting conversation tonight with Katrine Marçal and Ryan Avent. We are very happy for that. My name is Helene Larsson Posett. I'm the culture counselor at the Embassy of Sweden. Before we get started, I just want to mention a few words about the exhibition we are located in right now. It's called Arctic Highways, and it was opened around 3 weeks ago. And it is an exhibition with 12 indigenous artists from Sweden, from Norway, Finland, Canada, and the US. And many of the artworks you see around you are dealing with the issues, the problems, the common problems and challenges indigenous people and communities are having today, but also historically. And we were very happy that we had the world premiere of this exhibition here, and it will go on tour to 4 American institutions and also to Canada. So that was the exhibition. So now back to this exciting talk. Katrine Marçal, you're a journalist and you're based in London and working for the biggest newspaper in Sweden called Dagens Nyheter. But you're also a writer, and that's why we have you here tonight. And you have been writing this excellent book, A Mother of Invention, How Good Ideas Get Ignored in an Economy Built for Men. And I can highly recommend this. This is what you will talk about tonight, and you can also buy it afterwards by Politics and Prose, one of my favorite bookstores here in DC, and you will also be able to sign the book afterwards. And moderator for this conversation is Ryan Avent, and you are a trade and international economics editor for the Economist, but you, and I understand you have been covering global economics since 2009. But you're also an author of The Wealth of Humans, but also The Gated City. And before I hand over to you, I would like to thank the publisher, Abrams Press, that are organizing this together with us. And welcome everyone. Over to you, Ryan.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that introduction. Thanks to all of you for braving the weather and coming to join us here. I'm so pleased to be able to have this conversation with Katrine. She did the same for me when my last book came out. We had a really nice time. She was very gracious. And the book, if you haven't had a chance to read it yet, is just beautifully written. It's full of incredible historical facts, and also just provides some amazing insight about how the economy works, how innovation works, and how often it doesn't work the way we might want it to. So we haven't really discussed much of a plan here, but I thought maybe to get started, to give people a sort of a sense of kind of some of what the book is about, we might talk a little bit about cars, because there's an early chapter on cars, which really deals with these wonderfully subtle ways in which the shading of a particular technology as masculine or feminine affects how people respond to it, affects whether they think of it as a technology or an improvement at all, and for those reasons ends up affecting the world in really profound ways. So tell us how it came to be that we all drove petrol-powered cars.
Yeah, right. So this book is all about gender and innovation, and perhaps we're not always that used to talking about these two things in context, and we're certainly not used to thinking about gender as something that can hold innovation back. And that is the kind of the case I tried, or ideas about gender bias as something that can hold innovation back. And that's the case I'm trying to make in the book. And with cars, the chapter on cars is about electric vehicles, which were around already at the dawn of the automobile era in London, a place where we both have lived in the late 1800s. You could phone up an electric taxi company and they would come and pick you up. And you could charge your electric from an outlet in your stable in the 1910s. And so this form of technology is old, And what I focus on in the book is how electric cars came to be marketed and product developed with women in mind. And actually the ads from that time are just amazing. These sort of ladies in big hats, going into electric vehicles. And the same year that Henry Ford launched the T-Ford, which was supposed to be the car for everyone, the vehicle, the car that put the world on wheels, his own wife, Clara Ford, went out and didn't buy a T-Ford, but bought an electric car, because that was sort of the choice for wealthy women. And what I talk about in the book is how this then shaped the market, the whole automobile market. Because, firstly, these cars were product developed with women in mind. They were the first, electric cars were the first cars that you could drive in a skirt. They were the first cars with roofs, because there was this idea that, men should drive petrol-driven cars because they were smelly and dangerous and fast and could go further, while electric vehicles were marketed to women because they were very good in urban environments, they were safer, they were much more comfortable, you could start them from the driver's seat, you didn't have to get out and crank them going, which was very dangerous. And they were the first cars to be made with roofs because, men were not sort of allowed to demand a roof because it's not manly, right? So a lot of inventions that then were integrated into cars were sort of done for women in electric cars. But then what happened is, of course, that because electric vehicles started to be seen or were seen as feminine, many male consumers didn't want them. So the electric car industry kind of held back the size of its own market. And the electric vehicle mainly it was viewed almost not like a car, but as a drawing room on wheels or something, like an extension of the feminine sphere of the home, and hence was not seen as technology, and this actually contributed to the electric car then disappearing and us building a whole world for petrol-driven technology. It wasn't the main reason, but automobile historians, they talk about the battery issues, they talk about a couple of big investments into electric car business models of the time that didn't work out, and they talk of other cultural factors. And I say, let's call those other cultural factors what they are, which is sexism or gender bias.
Well, it would be nice to think that here, 100 plus years later, we sort of learned our lesson. But, when you think about the places where electric cars are making inroads, at least here in the United States, it's Elon Musk's Teslas that can go from 0 to 60 in 2 seconds. It's these massive, electric pickup trucks that it's, finally a man can feel safe in his masculinity.
Even with a roof.
Even with a roof, right?
Yes.
So it's really astonishing.
How gendered it is, yeah.
Yeah. And I think, you have a line in there that's sort of about how, the way that we innovate and the way that the world ends up developing is often determined by the thoughts that we allow ourselves to think. Mm-hmm. And it's really, it's such a profound thing that we went in this direction rather than another direction. And this comes up sort of repeatedly throughout the book. And so I thought, for instance, there is a discussion in the book about computing. Yes. The way that computing is developed. I don't want to give all the good bits myself, but initially, computers were humans who would do calculations themselves. If you were someone who needed a bunch of calculations, then you get a room full of people, typically women, to do this for you. And computing power was initially measured in
girl hours. Girl hours, yeah.
And I think the computing example is a really interesting one because it's sort of, you get into how, as a profession changes in status, changes in its coding from masculine to feminine.
Yeah.
And that's sort of, can you talk a little bit more about why we end up having that? Why is it that as a job becomes, is it that as it becomes more, more demanding or better paid, it becomes more masculine? Is it a process that works sort of, both things happen at the same time?
Yeah, okay, big question. So I will need to talk about my mother now, Ryan. Because, when my mother was pregnant with me in the early 80s in Sweden, she was a person who had worked at an art gallery and then with the administration of library catalogs, and wasn't, kind of taking her career very seriously. She had a child and she thought she needed a more stable career. And she kind of picked something. And she picked computer science because in the early 80s, that was still a normal thing to do if you'd worked at an art gallery and done some administration of library catalogs. And so she went to university and she studied computer science and she became a programmer. So I grew up in the tech industry before it was the tech industry, and it was, my image of the tech industry was these ladies with big curly sort of hair who came to our house with cakes. And then I saw it all change, and my mother, when she retired, obviously a few years ago, still doing, I think she was still at the same company. They'd just been sort of bought and sold a gazillion amounts of times. The whole profession was very different, and it had gone from female-dominated to very male-dominated, and the status had completely changed. The pay was very different. And I do not talk about my mother in the book, but I do talk about, I just like you, it is very, very interesting how sort of status and pay follows gender in the economy. And the case I make in the book is that how we define technology and what professions we define as technical and not is a big, big part of that. And I do tell a bigger story in the book about how whenever women women invented software, right? And that's a pretty big thing. But when women did that, it wasn't considered to be tech or technology, or all the things women have done historically, whether that's ceramic or lots of inventions around weaving and cloth historically. Whenever women do things, it's just not considered to be technology. And it was the same with a lot of computing that women did. And then suddenly it gets defined as very technical. The men come in, and status and pay changes completely. That's the case I make in the book. I think a lot of it has to do with what we define as technical and technology and not. And status sort of follows that. And the definition of technology follows very closely, I'd say, our definition of masculinity through our history, which is why women end up being erased from the history of innovation, and also why computing can change from female-dominated to male-dominated within a generation. We forget all about it and now assume that there's some kind of, you have to have like a particular type of masculine brain in order to be good at computing. And these things have profound economic consequences for women.
Well, I think it's, you mentioned that that women have there's a perception that women have a brain that works differently and that doesn't allow them. And you think of it as being such a sort of Victorian thing that these feminine sensibilities they can't. Yeah. But you have these communities in Silicon Valley now that sort of are convinced that the male brain is like wired to like manipulate shapes in such a way, and at such and it's such that it's just not appropriate for women to have this occupation. It's really extraordinary, and I think I think there's an interesting question there, which is if we're thinking about how to change the tech industry, and this is sort of a thing that comes up repeatedly in the book. Is it a matter of changing the way that women approach the field? Mm-hmm. Is it a matter of changing the field as it is so it's more open to women? Mm-hmm. What is it going to take to break down some of these barriers?
So a big one I think which we haven't touched on, which is it's a bit in the book is the financial sector and how we fund things, particularly in the tech sector, and the difficulties women have getting investments. And I make the case that goes sort of the venture capital model and its dominance. It is just not it doesn't help sort of getting more women into venture capital, for example, or it goes to the core of that sort of structure of funding that it will discriminate against the ideas that women tend to have. So I think that's, I think there's a lot of sort of financial innovation that's required in order to fix a lot of this. But then more with the tech industry, I mean, I think, well, I don't think it's women that need to change, but I do think, I mean, some of the stuff that I've tried to do with this book and changing the narrative and writing women back into the history of innovation is very, very important and very worth doing, not just because it's fair or more accurate, but because it also changes, what innovation then becomes and how we see it, and enables us to sort of, I think, do a lot more.
Well, you mentioned the financial side. You have this staggering statistic in there from Sweden, I think. Which, is a remarkably egalitarian country.
Yeah, thanks for saying that here at the Swedish Institute.
And it's the venture capital allocated.
Yeah.
89% of it goes to all male.
99.
99%. 1% goes to
women, and that is almost exclusively white women as well in Sweden. Yeah.
And it's really just.
And it's better here in the US actually. I think it's 2 or 3. Yeah. And the UK where I live is the same as Sweden. Is 1% goes to women, and in the UK I think 0.02 goes to Black British women. So it's brutal.
I mean, when you just think about the human potential that's not being accessed there. Thinking about sort of stereotypes and the way things are coded in terms of innovation, you have sort of another theme of the book is the way in which innovation is often presented as something that has to kind of crush and kill and destroy.
Yes.
And when we think about the first early humans developing pointed sticks, we automatically conceive of them as being spears that were used for hunting and not digging for food and things like that.
Yeah.
And I guess something I wanted to ask you was, how much of that is about gender per se, and how much of it is about the dictates of the market and what the market forces firms and investors to do? Because it's cutthroat. You have competition. There are a lot of zero-sum games out there. And I guess, is that something that that tends to push innovation in a particularly, almost hostile direction?
Oh, I mean, I don't know. I mean, you think about the market. So, who do you do innovation for? I mean, women have influence 80% of all consumer decisions. They think, the clever people in the global economy. That's a lot. That's big consumption power. And then 90% of all technological products and services are designed by men. I would say that's a market failure. I don't know. I mean, you work for The Economist. What's the verdict?
Well, we tend to think that if there are big bills on the sidewalk, that people pick them up.
You think that's a problem? Yeah, exactly.
That's what The Economist thinks.
Yeah.
But clearly that's not.
That's not happening. Yeah. So I think women are underserved as a market, and I do think the financial. I mean, going back to those brutal numbers on venture capital, the role of the financial sector is to allocate capital to people with ideas who can serve these markets. You have people with ideas, and you have the market, and the capital is not going there, so something is wrong there. But your point on sort of this sort of violent way we have of thinking of innovation is, I talk about it in the book. This, I mean, in economics, often there's this idea that innovation comes through war or conflict, right? It was it's too bad with the Second World War, but at least we got radar and
nuclear weapons.
Too bad with the First World War, but we got trench coats and wristwatches and cigarette lighters, and there's this whole narrative that sort of that's when things happen, and it's really if you look at it, it doesn't really hold up. And what I'm interested in, why do we think of innovation like that? And you have the same way of talking about it in Silicon Valley, sort of the move fast and break things, and then we're surprised when technology does that, sort of breaks, you know, important markets or democracy or other things that are valuable. But that's the whole way. And then, you know, I sort of course, because this is a book in feminist economics, say that a big part of the solution here is to sort of write women back into the history of innovation, because it changes what innovation then is. This assumption that we think that the first tool was, or the first innovation was, as you say, a spear, some kind of hunting weapon. And we have no idea. We just assume that that's how innovation started. We were walking around on all fours and somebody got up and sharpened a stick, and that was the first innovation, and everything else is like an extension of that first spear invented by some man. That's a story, that's a completely made up story. We have no idea. But what does that story do? It ties our will to innovate and create technology to this sort of innate will to conquer and dominate the world around us. And I think that's a very damaging idea. And I think it goes quite deep. And when you sort of just look at, you take sort of, put women back into the history of innovation, and you look at something like the digging stick, which is probably more likely to have been the first tool, and they think was invented by women, and you replace that man in the story with the stick, with the hunting weapon, with a woman with a digging stick, then the narrative changes. Then innovation is not in the same sort of inevitable way, sort of move fast and break things, and it can become much more. And I think that's the, you know, sort of that's the whole point of taking down patriarchy. It's because it prevents us all from experiencing the full extent of what it means to be human, and it's about giving us that, you know, possibility. And that was pretty deep, sorry, but yeah, you wanted to know about markets. I answered that, didn't I?
You did.
I did, yeah.
Well, I was, in reading the book, I couldn't help thinking about sort of current events. And there's almost this hope, I think, that people have that, well, you know, the war is horrible,
yeah.
But maybe it will sort of get us to do some of the innovation we haven't been, you know, getting around to doing with respect to getting off fossil fuels or coming up with more efficient ways to blow people up, or who knows what. And it's just interesting how deeply ingrained it is.
Yeah.
But the book does talk about some contemporary innovators who are women.
Yeah.
Kylie Jenner, who I guess I had not realized that she was the youngest billionaire. Displaced Mark Zuckerberg.
Yes. Yes, and then that was kind of challenged, but yes.
Well, is she not anymore? Or?
Yeah, I don't think she is anymore. Okay. Somebody here might know. Yeah. I feel there's somebody here who knows more about that than me.
But there was, in discussing sort of the influencer world, you talk about how there's this sort of combination of being both a producer and a consumer.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me because you know, in your first book, you talk about a lot of the things that economics, sort of the blind spots that it has, and the things that aren't taken into consideration, and it's interesting that, you know, in a way, what a lot of influencers are doing are bringing the market into places where it hadn't been before.
Yes.
And this can be very lucrative.
Yes.
But you are sort of, I don't know, it's as a, you know, as an old-fashioned kind of fuddy-duddy, I'm sort of like, I don't know about this. But I don't know. How do you think about that? Is it a healthy development? You know, the fact that we are sort of, you know, have these new lifestyle icons. Yeah. Is it a healthy development that the market is now more intrusive, and so you know, you're watching a video on your phone of someone, you know, doing the dishes, and it's an advertisement at the same time.
Yeah, no, it was the hardest chapter to write, and I really felt that I needed to do it because it's like a book on tech and women, and that is tech and women. You know, it's a big thing. It's not just the Kardashians. It's actually, if you look at it as a phenomenon.
It's all the people keeping up with the Kardashians.
Yeah, and no, but I mean, even in the, it's you know, young Chinese women going to Europe, you know, buying European luxury clothes and then selling them back through social channels in China, and being able to have different lives. It's sort of, you know, it's a global thing in many ways, and it's worth looking at and taking seriously. And there is a long history of women and consumption, because women, it's probably the only, one of the very few economic roles that women have actually been encouraged to take on, is the role of consumer. And women had consumption power before we had the vote, right? So it was an area where, you know, where there is a long history. The first department stores were an innovation that were sort of done with women in mind, as sort of safe spaces where women could move around without threat of sexual harassment and do shopping. You know, that was, you know, when Selfridges was creating Selfridges, the big department store in London, that was the thinking. This is like, you know, safe space for women. And so that was done for women as consumer. And so there's an interesting sort of story of women and consumption power, or is it power? I guess that's what you're asking. Or is it not power for women? Is it, you know, and I'm trying to sort of deal with those questions in that chapter. And I guess where I end up with is that, you know, there is certainly something interesting about that. You know, we say that it's these sort of traditional female things, you know, the home, cooking and interior design, having a family, these things that we don't tend to think of as economic activities in economics. And then we have all of these women making loads of money, turning all of these things into economic activities, using technology, using social media. That is interesting. But I guess I end up with saying is that, you know, yes, there could be power in these things, and, you know, the biggest earners on Instagram are women, but, you know, who owns Instagram? And who can change the algorithm like that and completely change the business models of all of these women? That's not women. That's Zuckerberg. So there is that sort of power difference, and that you cannot sort of, it's there, and that's why it is still problematic, I think. But it was a tricky chapter to write, because I think the material is complex.
Well, there is a power difference in a lot of different respects, but I think, you know, the book does some forward-looking, quite a lot of forward-looking things, and in thinking about how the economy is going to develop in the future, you know, one of the sort of discussions is what's going to happen to different sorts of jobs as technology improves, as the capacity to automate improves, and can we expect a lot of men to be left behind by technological development? You know, I think you already are beginning to see a shift in sort of university graduation rates. Women are much more likely to go to college now and get a degree, and it seems like things are changing. Does that mean that we're going to get a shift in power? Does it mean that we're going to have some sort of male revolution again?
Yeah.
Are we going to have right? Or we're going to start coding things, you know, wherever it is that these guys end up? That suddenly becomes the high status thing to do.
Yeah, I think what's happening on the labor market in terms of what jobs are going to be automated and what effect that will have on gender is extremely interesting, and really a conversation really worth having, and I don't think we're having it enough. The case I try to make in the book is you know, obviously labor markets are incredibly gendered things. You know, you have women over here doing one thing and men over here doing another thing. They are incredibly gender segregated. I mean, Sweden has one of the most gender segregated labor markets, you know, in the world. So obviously if we're going to have something very big, like loads of robots coming in, fundamentally changing the labor market, that's going to have very gendered effects. And what I talk about in the book is that the clever people again say that we're in a second machine age now, with how the technology that's coming in now is profoundly going to change our lives in really fundamental ways. And because it's called the second machine age, that of course implies there was a first machine age, which you have written about very well in your book, Wealth of Humans. But, and I go back to that machine age, sort of the 1800s, centered around England, and what happened then and how incredibly gendered that was. And how men, machines came into the factories, changed communities, men lost their jobs because a certain type of physical strength was not needed in these factories anymore. The factory owners or capitalists, or what do you want to call them, depending on what language you want to speak, hired women and children instead because they were cheaper, and you ended up with these unemployed, furious men who couldn't get a job, women having to be breadwinners, communities ruined. I mean, it was such a sort of a regendered story, and somebody like Friedrich Engels, who wrote about this at the time, he's more famous for then going on founding communism with his friend Marx, but he was a journalist at the time, and he wrote about this, and he was just furious about what the machines took from the men, right? And reading that sort of historical narrative, it's very interesting to think about what's happening today, because the studies we have today, where economists are trying to guess again what which jobs are going to be automated or not. In many of them, there is they show in different ways that many sort of male-dominated sectors of the economy will probably be easier to automate than many of the sectors of the economy where you have a lot of women, particularly centered around care. So will that mean that similar things will happen? I think that is really worth talking. And is it already happening in sort of some regions, right?
Yes.
You have written about this, so I want to hear what you think as well.
Well, I think it's it's difficult to predict the future.
Yeah.
Reading it, I guess my feeling was that. Well, I guess what I would say is, you sort of make this point that we are, to a greater extent than we realize, we are in control of our own destinies, right? Mm. That technology, we like to assume sometimes that technology determines how the economy evolves, how society evolves. But actually, we have quite a lot of say over it. And so, talking about the early Industrial Revolution, it's not just the market at work. No. The British government sent in troops to crush early efforts to unionize, and this had a huge effect on the way that the economy developed. And so I guess my my sense is that we're kind of at the mercy, to some extent, of the existing balance of political forces. Mm-hmm. And even now we are sort of seeing this anger on the part of groups of men who feel that they've been left behind, either justly or unjustly. And I guess that makes me worry a lot, that we're not, that as much as it is within our power to do things differently, to develop technology differently, that maybe we just won't be able to do it.
Yeah. No.
But that's kind of grim to think about.
It's grim. And I mean, it is. And but there is also a huge, I think, political opportunity in all of this, because if it's true, and I don't know if this is, as you say, it's hard to predict the future, but if there is something inherent in, AI or the types of, or the robots that makes it actually, and a lot of things seem to be that way, that it is easier at the moment for them to automate certain type of tasks, and things that have to do with care or interpersonal relationships is, so far much harder to get machines to do. If that is true, if that's like something that is sort of is happening, then we will end up with, because women are specialized in economically in the things that machines tend to find the hardest to do, you will end up with a lot of men unemployed, whether they'll be bankers or truck drivers, right? And the parts of the economy that we have been looking down on for historically, because we see sort of care work as feminine, and what I say in the book is maybe we've been focusing too much on trying to teach girls to code, and we should start to teaching boys to care, right? Maybe that is the future that we're moving into. That's a pretty big thing, but it is also a huge, there is a huge opportunity because, we could actually, if, humans have a competitive advantage doing these things, a lot of these jobs are very meaningful to a lot of people, and we could, if we created political institutions and policies to make this sort of shift easier, that's something you've talked about in your books, then there is an opportunity there to reorganize the economy and the labor market and enabling people to specialize more in the things that really makes us human, which is, relationships and care and these things, and use technology to do that. But that requires this sort of, I would say, this gender analysis of both the labor market and this technological change. And yeah, I don't see that happening.
Yeah. I think when I'm being optimistic,
yes, which is not very often.
It's not often, but it's good to do every once in a while. When I'm feeling optimistic, what I think about is the extent to which things are generational.
Yeah.
And it becomes easier to make these sorts of big social changes as the old get older and the young sort of play a bigger role in society. And it seems to me, at least, that in a lot of respects on gender issues, young people are just miles ahead of their elders, and more conscious of it, but also kind of much more have much more fluid ideas about what people can do and what they can be. But you sort of you close the book in this what I think is a really wonderful way. You make a point throughout the book that that when we sort of create these separate spheres, we sort of, or when we hive off a whole part of society and say that that's feminine, we're sort of limiting what we consider to be the human experience in this really, terrible and unfortunate way. And then you sort of bring it back together at the end by sort of thinking about climate change and the extent to which getting where we need to go with climate change is going to require us to kind of have both, both perspectives, to have the fullness of humanity there. And I guess it's, I wanted you to talk about that a little bit, because there is this debate when we think about climate change, about whether what we need to do is sort of have sackcloth and ashes and give up all the things that make us modern and that sort of thing. Or whether we don't need to worry about climate change at all because technology will bail us out, that sort of attitude. How do you, where's the middle ground there that leads us to our...
And that is the old debate. And I used a distinction, which is not mine, but is from Charles Mann, which is an American science journalist who talks about that in every discussion around the environment ever, for a very long time, there is this, it turns into this duel between what he calls wizards and prophets. So a wizard would be somebody like Elon Musk, right, who thinks that technology will always bail us out, and innovation is, nature has always been trying to kill us. That is what she does. And we have always kind of been able to prevent that through coming up with different types of innovation. Why is this time different, right? It's just about more innovation, more technology, and we'll fix this. And wizards, they love these sort of big scale solutions and, have to do with space or building huge things. And so we have the wizard, and then we have the prophets who are saying the exact opposite. They're saying, how technology and innovation is what got us into this mess. That's what sort of messed up, the climate. And so how can more technology and more innovation be the solution to this? We need behavioral change. We need to live differently. So it's wizard against prophet. And the thing is, it's not a very constructive debate, because I think most people realize that it's both in a way. And if you look at, or even the cases I have in my book, everything from the rolling suitcase to electric cars, I think it's very clear if you look at the history of innovation, that is always, it's new technology and behavioral change in different sort of complex ways. And, we change, how we consume food, and then suddenly we have a new market for other products that are more environmentally friendly, and what comes first. And, this sort of matcha thing between wizards and prophets, it's not really getting us anywhere. So I, at the end of the book, I talk about what I think is the big problem with both the wizard and the prophet, and this is where it gets a bit weird, which is, the whole book is about how we gender things and how things that we gender feminine are considered less important, and probably the biggest thing that we have gendered as feminine and therefore really take for granted is nature, right? It's Mother Nature. And there is this idea of technology as a masculine force that has to sort of conquer and control and extract things from nature that is very gendered. And both the wizard and the prophet have it. So the solution to sort of moving beyond the wizard and the prophet is to find something with a different relationship to nature. Because both the wizard and the prophet, they see nature as something other than technology. So where is the archetype that sort of sees technology and nature in a different way? That is the witch, of course. So the book ends up talking about witches. The difference between a wizard and a witch is, the wizard is up in his tower, he's doing his magic, his innovation, he gets, from up there. The witch as an archetype is down in the forest, in communion with nature, and her sort of innovation or her magic, her technology comes, sort of her power comes through that. And that's sort of breaking down this distinction between technology and nature, which is, and the idea that technology should, to dominate nature in the way that is very, I think, very ingrained in us. And the way to do that is actually, it has a lot to do with gender and power and rewriting that story. So it ends on a very kind of out there, not very Economist way.
Well, it's not very economisty, but that's good. I thought that was, it recommended it. I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for questions, but I guess I was wondering, reading the book, knowing you, what sort of, where did the idea for the book come from? Was there, is your life full of moments where you were like, why is it like this?
Why is it like this? No, I guess, I talked about my mom already, so we don't have to go in there again, but I think, as somebody, a financial journalist, having sort of experienced that as a child, this profession going from female-dominated to male-dominated and how that changed in status and pay was something that was always at the back of my mind in a way. So I guess this sort of connection between what we define as technology, how that, in what way that has to do with gender and what are the economic consequences of that, was something that I have been thinking about. And then I also stumbled onto this, which starts the book, which we haven't talked about, the story of the rolling suitcase, and which is presented as this classic mystery of innovation. How did we manage to put why did we manage to put two men on the moon before we came up with the idea to put wheels on suitcases? Is this classic mystery of innovation. And I stumbled upon, and Nobel Prize winners in economics have talked about this, and I happened to stumble upon the correct answer to that question, which is actually gender bias. There was this idea that no man would ever roll a suitcase, and that led to, there were suitcases with wheels before the official invention of the rolling suitcase, but they were all niche products for women, which is why they were not taken seriously. So, and we are both journalists. You stumble onto something like that, you're like, okay, that's like a good start to a book. And so I guess it was those things. It was the suitcase and my mum.
Are there any questions from the audience for Katrine? Do we have a mic that we?
We have two.
Okay. Okay. It's funny thinking about the suitcase example. I think partly because it shines such an unflattering light on men and kind of what doofuses we are. But I think it's fascinating in the sense that it tells us something important about economics, right? That we have this wrong in some fundamental way.
Yeah.
Sorry, am I missing a hand?
Yeah, I think there was a hand.
Oh, Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't see you up front.
Oh, that's okay.
Okay, well, I'll stop rambling then. You go ahead.
This is fantastic. My question is that you talked about how computing and technology was really seen as feminine, and then there was a switch where it was more masculine.
Yeah.
Can you talk about some of the factors that were responsible for that switch?
Yes. I think there are some of the, I think it was different in, so I guess I mentioned the sort of the big, more philosophical one, which is that whenever women do something, it's not considered to be technology. And this, if women are good at something, we think of it as natural, right? So, you know, when women were good at programming, it was just considered to be like an extension of, you know, women are good at cooking from recipes, following instructions, so they must be good at computer programming as well, or they're meticulous, right? And this is what we do to women all the time. Like, women are good at something, it's a natural female ability, it's not a skill. And then the economic logic comes in and says, well, if you're good at this, but it's actually not a skill, so it's not something you acquired, it's a natural ability, why should we pay you well, right? So that's sort of the big thing, and then it started to be seen as more technical and more sort of as a skill, and then the men came in. What happened for example, in Britain is an interesting case because there the government actually, so computing was the first programmers in the world were British programmers during the war, and it was in Britain, women even, they were not just doing software, they were building computers. It was, and then the government in the 60s became worried about, they sort of saw that these machines were going to be probably quite economically important. And they saw that all the people that knew something about this were women, often sort of, you know, chain smoking, working class women in mini skirts, right? And they were like, we can't have one of those becoming head of computing for the Bank of England. That doesn't work. We need to get men into computing. And it was actually, this was Britain, so it was like, it's not just men, it has to be men of the right social class into computing. And there were actually like a real government program trying to encourage them, the men, to take an interest into computers. And it failed completely, actually. But then it did change. So I think, there's that, which was, you know, a political will really to change it from female dominated to male dominated, because in other countries, I mean, here in the US, I mean, they often talk about how, I think it was IBM who suddenly, they had a lot of female sort of software developers, and then they started using personality tests to recruit people into these jobs, and these personality tests were suddenly based on assumptions about what type of person you needed to be in order to be good at this, and suddenly all women were sort of screened out. So I think there were sort of different reasons for it, really, and they kind of, and there are some countries where we still have sort of more women doing this. So I don't think it's one story, but there is a general story about that when things become defined as technical and technology, the women are pushed out in one way or the other. And that's why I think that's the central bit, so that's why I try to focus on, because I hope that answered a little bit of that.
And it's so funny how we are so good at creating justifications after the fact.
Yes.
For these, you know, bizarre decisions.
And I find even, I mean, I've met, you know, economists who sort of study these things and who often don't know about, I mean, who just assume that computing was always male. And based there in many other ways brilliant research on that, and you just go, well, my mom, you know, and they are shocked. We forget about this.
Economists and their assumptions. Are there other questions? Let's get you a mic. And then was there another one in the back? You can get a mic too.
So, thank you for a wonderful book. This is just a short follow-up, maybe it's also impossible, but let's say that women would have continued to dominate the programming. What do you think? How would the outcome be different?
Ooh, Yeah, I mean, like, we're predicting the future, right? No, like, not even the future, but like an alternative future. That's even harder. I don't know. What do you think? You think, yeah? In what way? Oh, they've taken the mic from him. Yeah, I mean, I interviewed some fascinating sort of pioneers in this field, sort of, Dame Stephanie Shirley was a British one that came to mind. I interviewed for, just background for the book, and and it was during the lockdown we had in the UK, and everybody was talking about working from home, and she's in her 80s now, and she had a software company in the 50s and 60s in the UK, and she was just laughing because they were already working from home, because she was just, her whole business idea was to hire women who had been sort of already starting to be pushed out of computing, and hire them, and the only way to hire them was to enable them to work from home, and they were doing it just using phones, and they even had these tapes to put on that made when they took calls from clients, this sounded like other typewriters, so you couldn't hear the kids screaming. And she's this woman in her 80s, and she was just telling me about this and just laughing about all the discussion that was going around at the moment about, working from home and how, the technology needed for that. And she was like, yeah, we had phones and we had these tapes of typewriters. So I guess that's one of the ways it would have been different. It would have been working from home and flexible work a lot earlier, I guess, just judging from that conversation with her. And I do think, I do think it would have been different, not because there's some kind of biological reason for women programming like this, or not like that, but it would have, I think it would have been different.
Was there another question right here? Okay.
Thank you, first of all. Congratulations. I'm from Argentina, and many times in Latin America, I don't know if it's the same in Europe, we read in the media like many posts and stuff about women being the saviors, like women entrepreneurs being the saviors or to our region. What do you think about this, of course, statement, which then we have no even resources, but this is the big...
Yeah. Will you say a little bit more about that, just to give me a bit more context?
Oh, yeah, I mean, from media to international organizations, many times mention that, well, I don't know, with genderless investments or some other tools, they try to make women to be the ones that save in the tech and entrepreneur ecosystem. But then there are, of course, limitations within the ecosystem and the role of saviors.
Yeah, it's problematic, right, isn't it? Yes. It is, because it's just, this mess has been made often by men, and then we have to turn women into this creature that can automatically fix that by just being different from that. And I do think that is very limiting and quite problematic. But of course, I mean, we need, the potential of women is severely held back by the economic system and the financial system, and the way women can't get access to capital or credit, or and all of these things need to be addressed in order for that potential to be unleashed, and we need that potential. So, but I think I sense that you also think the whole savior rhetoric is quite problematic. I mean, it's the same with that women are assumed to be much more risk averse than men, and which is not true. I mean, I think it's a 2% difference or something in how we see risk. We sort of exaggerate these differences in order to create narratives that often don't benefit women, I think. But I mean, I guess this is a lot of the things that are legitimized using that kind of language are worth doing, but Yeah, no, I think I agree with you.
There's something typical about it, though, right? It's like an inherently difficult situation.
Yeah.
And hand that to
Yeah.
women.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
sort of like with the working from home thing.
Yeah.
You know, it ends up putting so much of a burden on parents in various ways,
Yeah.
and it's just assumed that the ones who will carry this burden without complaining
Yes.
so often
Yes.
are the women.
Yeah.
I think we may have time for one more question.
Following up on that, thinking more about solutions and transformation, whether it's maybe micro-lending is an example in that region and elsewhere,
Yeah.
but there are organizations and individuals motivated by sort of altruism or for social change to include more women, whether it's in academia, in philanthropy, in international organizations. There's also, I think, a corporate interest, if, you know, not just protecting the status quo, but if there's really an economic and business rationale for reaching the consumption power and decision makers. So what are some of the solutions that you've identified and or organizations, companies, individuals who are achieving positive change?
Yeah. I do think there is, I mean, when it comes to the venture capital gender gap or male monopoly on venture capital, I think there are some interesting things being done, people sort of coming up with new ways, new funding logics and so on. None of it is, you know, at the scale it should be, but I think there is actually quite a lot happening in terms of thinking, and there are organizations who try to address these things, and so I think there's things happening there. I think also there is, but I do think we need to realize it is quite a complex problem, and just because we're at the Swedish embassy, I'm going to address it. I mean, I think there is the fact, for example, that in Sweden, a country that does so many good things on gender equality and, you know, investing 4% of GDP into parental leave, and you know, you have fathers rolling buggies and, you know, in daylight in Stockholm, and all of these things that the rest of the world wants, and all of these things are great and wonderful, but they do not translate into fixing these things that I talk about here in the book. Like the Swedish startup wonder that they're going to chuck me out to the embassies here, that we are very proud of is, you know, that is 99% venture capital going to male funders. And, you know, these amazing care infrastructure, or, you know, men staying home with their kids, it's not fixing it. Which doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing all of these things, and, like, you know, you should certainly be doing them here in this country, because they're worth doing. But they don't fix this problem, and I think, which is why we need to have, you know, much more. You know, we need to look, you know, comparative discussion and policies and what works here in this country, and really think about it, because I don't think there is any sort of ready-made solution. You know, you take the Swedish model and then it will work itself out. It doesn't, and yeah, it's a tricky problem, and I think it goes very deep. I mean, I thought I was writing this very optimistic, funny book, and nobody read it like that.
It's very funny.
It was funny. Thank you, Ryan. But people, I mean, the main feedback I get from readers is like, you made me so depressed, and I was not expecting that. But I think it's because, unfortunately, I think the book is about how deep these things go. I mean, it is about how we have defined technology for thousands of years. It's sort of, it's a deep thing, and it goes very deep, and it's going to take some time, and it has profound, you know, economic consequences for women today, and it holds innovation back, and it shapes what the economy is and what it can be, and what the robots are going to be, and who's going to lose their job and not, and it just becomes very big, I guess, when if you believe me. I mean, some people don't agree with it, but the readers who do, they end up I'm really selling the book here, aren't I? But I do think that's true. I do think it's a big and tricky problem, and so I can't sort of pinpoint, you know, this is the solution or this. But yes, the financial sector has a lot to do.
Well, it's a very big and difficult question, and I think it's an incredibly insightful treatment of it. And I want to thank all of you again for coming. Thank you for your questions. Oh, okay.
Oh.
Well,
Sorry, I'm.
The ambassador.
Yes, I'm
then she gets to ask her question.
No, it's on. Sorry. No, thank you so much, and I can assure you we will not chuck you out. If I may ask a question, and we all know it, more women than men are graduating from university, or maybe not at all universities, but there's a growing trend with women graduating from university and so on. Do you think this will change these matters, or what do you think?
No, I'm not.
Are women just not going into the right sectors when they go to university?
Yeah, I mean, so I think, computer science is the one that's now, at least in Sweden and in Britain, the one that's the trickiest to get women into. And it's a field, pioneered by women just a few decades ago. It's staggering. No, I don't think more women graduating automatically from university will change sort of the power structure, because I think the more you look into the economic history of women, it is really the story of, you tell women to go over there, women go over there, and status and pay goes over there. And then you tell women to go over there, status and pay is over there, and they do. And then it disappears somewhere else. And it follows, like I say in the book, sort of the definition of what's technology and what's not technology follows our definition of masculinity. And if you don't break these things down or challenge them, this story is going to keep repeating itself. And that's why it is so problematic. And I don't think you can sort of just take that statistic. Of course it's encouraging, and women fought very hard to be able to go to university. It is something to celebrate, but I don't think you can think that will automatically change other things. No, I don't. Depressing again.
Well, if you haven't had an opportunity to read the book, I strongly encourage you to get it. To remind you once again, Politics and Prose will be out in the lobby with the books, and I believe Katrine will be signing.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to commit you unless you're thank you all again for coming and for your questions, and thank you so much, Katrine.
Thank you.